You think about immortality and you think about things that people are trying to make sure that maybe their legacy never dies and maybe they find a place in the future that's going to be for them. That feels like they're really skirting around the real issues, maybe acceptance of that sort of boundary between the inevitability of death and not.
Hi, I'm Mike Hill and you're watching Futurist World, your home for big ideas about the future and how to shape the world of tomorrow. Today is going to be illuminating because we're catching up with preeminent healthcare thought leader, researcher and keynote speaker, Dr. Mark Bowie, on the future of dying. Based in Melbourne, Australia, Mark is an internationally recognised leader in hospice and palliative medicine. He's the Director of Palliative Medicine at St Vincent's, Melbourne, and the Co-Deputy Director of the Centre for Palliative Care. Mark is especially interested in the promotion and incorporation of palliative care principles and practices across all illness and disease trajectories. He's an active participant in the worldwide movement to advance palliative care and an innovator in the implementation of new end-of-life pathways. So get ready to throw off your shackles and ponder some of life's really big questions. And remember to keep your finger on the pulse by subscribing to our podcast at futurist.world. The future of dying. Let's start in the past with this one. How much has dying changed?
Dying is inevitable, I think. It's inevitable. It was inevitable in the past. But I think as we're moving into our more sort of modern society and into the future, I think the journey towards dying is changing considerably. So I think around the world, around the globe, there is still great variation in the social, economic, political kind of environments that people are born into. And that can really heavily influence the way people journey in this space.
Now, our friend Dr. Raj has been part of this series as well, and he talks about the differences that have happened in India around dying as more medical technologies become available there. Are you also seeing that trend in Australia and elsewhere?
Yeah, look, I think with the extension of life, with the ability to manipulate and treat things longer and a greater duration, I think people are being more aware of their ability to sort of control their circumstances in a sense, and they want to have more choice, they want to have more ability to control that pathway, to actually sort of even think about orchestrating death, to avoid death, to all those sorts of things.
So do you think some medical technology is getting in the way, and how do we find that balance between the need for medical technology to improve life towards the end of life and actually having a good experience of it?
Well, I think in some ways the palliative care movement is that go-between, and I think in many ways what palliative care can offer in that sort of holistic, person-centred approach, I think what we do is help navigate between the sort of technology, the interventions, the ability to be hopeful about treatment and cure and sustainability of a person's life, to the looking over your shoulder and thinking about the probability, possibility, or the inevitability of death.
So when you think about the future of dying, is the palliative care movement and strengthening and expanding that part of that story for you?
Look, I think so. Again, dying is a very individual thing, and obviously it's individual for the person, the family and the people around them, the community. But on a sort of global scale, palliative care has really evolved over the last 5 years and now has structures within the WHO and other sort of global entities that mean it has to be part of healthcare delivery.
I guess when we're talking the future of dying, we're also going to be exploring what a good death is. What does that mean to you, a good death?
I think really it's one of, again, thinking about the person who's at the centre of the issues and problems, allowing them to express their voice. It's also very important, most probably, for them to know in some way that they are actually dying. We make assumptions about these things, and sometimes we forget that actually if the person is aware that dying is coming at some stage, they're able to orchestrate things for themselves, have their maybe pass on legacy, whatever that means, whether it's a will, whether it's spiritual, whether it's sort of their story. But I think ultimately people want to tell their story in some way, and I think they want to feel valued. And I think, you know, unless people are aware of that and we have people to help unpack that, people miss those opportunities.
So how do you find that, being around people at the end of their life so frequently, on almost a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, look, It's challenging. It's something by sharing it with others. So it's not so much about the individual, it's about the team that works around a person. And I take great comfort in seeing other members of the team operating and working in this space. And I think what that does is allows us to have it's almost like having a 360-degree view of the person and the family, and to be able to work with them and just to see them find their place in this. And look, for some patients, that's an easy place to be. That's something they've conceptualised, they think about it, they're aware of it. For others, that's a very difficult journey and they're avoiding it at all costs. And they're the troublesome kind of situations that can be very taxing on people who are trying to support people, but you've still got to work with it. You've still got to work with them to find their way in the system.
And do you give much thought to your own death?
I've certainly have. I've had significant personal experiences of death around me, and that's given me a chance to reflect on, again, what's important. Also, the ability to communicate that to people can have lasting impact on the individual, the person who's going through grief and loss and bereavement. So making sure those important conversations happen in a hopefully a naturalistic sort of way, but one that's a little bit prompted is good. But yeah, look, I do think about it. Obviously you can never predict really, and I don't want to control my circumstances. I need to let my own life unfold and to hit the roadblocks and the barriers and the diagnoses that are coming my way at some stage, I suspect. But, I think it's given me a very healthy perspective, hopefully, to just kind of embrace as things unfold rather than take the fight or rile against things and, be in the right space to do things, yeah.
I know this is a bit of a cliche, but you often hear people say that death is, and thinking about dying brings a great perspective to their life. Do you find that with your own work and those that you work with? Do you think it actually can have an enhancing effect by thinking about your mortality?
Yeah. Look, I'll sort of come back to the global picture because more people are living longer and therefore have an opportunity to conceptualise that for themselves and help the family conceptualise it a little bit and work with it. But and I think similarly for staff, it does give you a perspective. It makes you want to maybe understand yourself more so you can be more present to people that are going through things. I think it's a great opportunity when you work in palliative care and end-of-life care to actually start to really unpack who you are and what that life means to you so you can work in the space. I watch a lot of our younger doctors kind of stepping into the space and at some point they're going to find that intersection between professional kind of stuff that's dictated their way of thinking in the world when they finally hit that they cross the divide between the individual kind of personal perspectives. And it's refreshing because that's when the real learning starts and the real ability to work in this space really gets going, So I think that's what the staff bring, I think, and you see it every day playing out, in small gestures and ways of interacting and so forth.
You mentioned control earlier and wanting to control everything around the dying process, and you were saying that actually wouldn't be your preference to
not mine
control too much. So can you tell me about control and dying and how these two how you find these two dynamics playing?
Look, I think a lot of people have sort of personality constructs that they really want to be the people driving the ship, the boat. I often use the analogy of a river, and there's many things that in an illness journey that you sort of connect against and you have to sort out and things crop up and you sort of make your way through. And then eventually you get to a sort of jetty and sometimes the jetty is the dying time, but sometimes you're so far away from it, it just doesn't make any sense. But for some people, absolutely at time of diagnosis or a significant event, maybe it's advancement of the disease or they end up in ICU and come out, something happens, but they really want to secure that they're going to feel safe. Again, if you want to feel valued and understood at your end of life, you need to feel safe. And I think safety in the broader sense, that not physical safety, but just spiritual, emotional context, sort of cocooned at the end of life.
So we're talking today about the future of dying. How does this idea of assisted dying fit into the future of dying for you? Is it inevitable? What does it actually mean?
Look, with or without assisted dying, people need an opportunity to connect to professionals, healthcare professionals, others who can actually give them that opportunity. So in some ways, assisted dying is one component, but it's not the big picture component. Things like expressing your wishes and values, advanced care planning, that's the big picture bit. That's the bit will help guide not only your own decision making, so people can reflect that to you, but it will guide others when you're not able to talk through your things, that they can approach your care in the way that you want it to be approached by. But so I think sometimes assisted dying can overwhelm things and seems to be like the big ticket item, but actually it's this broader issues of understanding a person, to give them the opportunity to sit in a very safe space at some point, even if they still access assisted dying.
I'd like to talk to you about the controversial topic of opioids for a moment. So I understand that opioids are used quite a lot in palliative medicine in bringing comfort to patients that have advanced disease. Can you tell me about that? And in terms of access to opioids going forward in the future, how might that relate to the future of dying worldwide? Yeah.
Look, I think the use of opioids has been very poorly understood. If you wind the clock back 50 years or 60 years ago, when palliative care was first being sort of conceptualised as a potential part of care in healthcare, people really didn't understand the nature of using opioids and how to use them in a methodical, systematic kind of way. So much has changed over the years, but research has sort of taken a long time to kick along. And so obviously there's been a pendulum swing, and I think globally there are still countries where access to appropriate and sort of titrated medicines to alleviate pain are still very difficult to find. So, you know, the problems that we're seeing in the sort of more Western kind of developed world is very much the pendulum swing, and now we're starting to see the fact that we need to be a little bit more circumscribed about what we offer, how we offer it, because people will naturally utilise these things in different ways, and there's a flow of medicines away from their utilisation for healthcare issues and for things that are causing pain and distress. So it's complex, but we've got the seesaw at the moment of the people that have ready access and oversupply to the people that have limited supply and limited access. So we've still got to address the imbalances on both sides of the seesaw in some way.
Are there other innovations that are happening, or inventions, new approaches that you think are propelling us into the future or hold a lot of promise for the future?
Well, I think, look, sometimes I think you see, and there's people in Australia working on this around technologies and things, you know, because we're living in a society where individuals are much more likely to be living by themselves, the substitutes for connection and contact, and some of those substitutes are sort of robotics and people sort of calming presence, you know, stroking people's arms and so forth, massage. There's the integration of robotics and kind of those sorts of things that is a horizon. Allowing people, we're seeing now through even our Australian disability, you know, National Disability Scheme, people are accessing mobility aids that turn them from being quadriplegic dependent to able to reconnect to the world. So there's new things that are actually making the journey more experiential and keeping people's humanity, I guess, no matter what the difficulties are that are leading up to the death. So they're exciting. I mean, there are some technologies that look a little bit, feel like pie in the sky. You know, you think about immortality and you think about things that people are trying to make sure that maybe their legacy never dies and maybe they find a place in the future that's going to be for them. That feels like they're really skirting around the real issues, maybe acceptance of that sort of boundary between the inevitability of death and not. So,
tell me more about this, Mark. I want to know about this sci-fi dystopia, because of course that is the ultimate goal for many people. When we talk about the future of dying, the future is don't die. So what is happening in this space?
Well, I think there does need to be some sort of acceptance of transition at some point. And I think for me, what people are doing now is creating legacy beyond death. And so traditional funerals and cremations are being replaced by different ways of the human body being sort of dissolved and moved on, being built into things, being part of going back into nature, being part of coral, developing coral reefs. So what happens to the body after death is sort of radically starting to change. But I think people are leaving things like their electronic social media legacy. So people are collecting their tweets and all their collection of all their stories, their conversations, and pulling them together, whether it's by story, by voice, and then sort of recreating avatars within games and things that are happening. I know a couple of the sort of gaming platforms now have spaces for legacy and death so that people can leave their persona there on those platforms. So whether you see that as a reality, people might argue it's a non-acceptance of death, but it certainly seems to be a movement that people are looking to that sort of immortalisation in other ways beyond the physical kind of realm, I guess. Yeah.
And in terms of life extension, do you see much happening in this space?
I think we're kind of hitting our peak. I mean, unexpected things are starting to present themselves in the world, the globe, economics. I think we've kind of hit a bit of a sort of we're hitting the plateau that maybe we're finding where life isn't necessarily going to push beyond without creating new issues and problems, new healthcare issues, new dependencies that maybe families can't support. It's not economically viable. There are, as we know, we're pushing the bush away and viruses are finding their place. There are all these things that are happening around the globe that we're not necessarily aware of that are going to impact. And so I do think maybe that boundary pushing life is kind of hitting its kind of edge from my thinking. But look, hey, 100 years ago, maybe 50 or 60 was seen as a good innings. It's kind of hitting the 80s now really for developed countries seems achievable, but maybe 100 and centenarians are going to be the next norm or something. So
the new threshold. Now, I know you're a big reader. Is there anything that inspires you in speculative fiction or science fiction, entertainment? Like when you think about this future of dying, is there some vision of the future that actually resonates with you?
Well, look, people who know me, or people who know me very well, know I'm a bit of a old Doctor Who nut. And that might sound a bit geeky and dorky, but I've known the program since I was a young child, since it first started. So I feel like I've travelled the world and travelled the globe with these guys over their many sort of generations. What I love about that show is they do look at all the possibilities, but then they always come back to the humanity. And that's, again, it's almost mirrors my story of what is important to me around end-of-life care and providing good end-of-life care. It's coming back to the humanity. I think people don't really know what that means until you're in that space. I think the closest you get to it, as we've seen when there's been terrible disasters, the bushfires, the floods, the natural disasters where people pull together and they kind of put their differences away and they support each other, and you get this real sense of kind of connection with each other. And I think that's, if people wanted to think about what is it like if you orchestrate and have a good death, it's finding that same level of connectivity. So I think that's a good way to look at it. And so that kind of inspires me when I do reading or see films, when they look at the sci-fi side, they look at the future, they look at the things that could be, but they really come back to what's important and what's really basic humanity.
Look, you've had a big hand in creating a system of palliative care in Australia that is the envy to many countries in the world. It's one of the most developed palliative care systems. But if I asked you to project forward into the future to wrap this up for us, what would you hope for, on the next horizon in terms of improving the future of dying for people here and elsewhere around the world?
I think people to have a better awareness for themselves that it's not something to run away from all the time, that you can balance the two elements together and not to be frightened by the possibility. Explore the possibility so that you can then be present to it. And that goes for everybody. It's not just patients and families, it's healthcare professionals as well. I do think, we can't always rely on government and structures and funding to find that space. You really see that in less developed countries where these small pockets pop up. But, you could be on a yurt in Mongolia, or you could be in some underdeveloped village in South America or India, and it's the same attitude of trying to provide the same thing, and I think that's exciting. So if that's going to spread and grow and develop, that's fantastic. We see system gaps even in Australia where people like deaf doulas are starting to pop up, people to help people navigate the systems and really take the same sort of steps that you do in birth to really try and connect with them. And even though people might say, well, that's not healthcare, but people need guidance. And if they're the people that are going to connect with them, then we need to sort of encourage people to all be working in the space together. So to me, that's what the future should be, that we should all be aware and connected and not ignore the possibility. And then when it becomes the inevitability, that we're ready and prepared and kind of ready to go,
Mark, thanks so much. That's a wrap on the future of dying. Thanks for helping us unpack it today.
Great. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on the future of dying. But before you go, I need to ask you something. We're here to make a change, but we need your help to do it. The purpose of this series is to move humanity forward, think bigger, and cast our minds into the future. So we'd love to know what made the biggest impression on you from today's conversation. Was it the hidden costs of denying death, or the new laws enabling assisted dying? Maybe it was discussion around life extension in the digital age. The best conversations happen right now, so please get involved, share the love, and leave a comment below. Another great place to join the conversation and find more illuminating content is at futurist.world. And when you're there, be sure to sign up for access to exclusive content and awesome giveaways, including a copy of Atul Gawande's seminal book, Being Mortal. You can also find us on all the usual social platforms. Thanks for joining us. The future is out there. See you next time on Futurist World.